But cultures don't respond well to cut and paste leadership. You have to respect the roots while still, in a way, gently nudging the system forward, right?
And those kinds of pivotal events, I mean, not just in your career, but in anybody's career, is what finally connects you to that purpose.
Welcome to Culture Café, a vibrant and inspiring podcast series brought to you by the Confederation of Indian Industry and Avtar, celebrating 25 years of shaping inclusive workplaces. In this milestone year, we bring you transformative conversations with leaders who are redefining workplace cultures. From boardroom wins to human movements that changed everything. These conversations are your backstage pass to how organizations thrive one connection at a time. In this episode, we speak to Radhika Nair, Head of People Culture India, Volvo Group India Private Limited.
Welcome to Culture Café, where we speak about culture, of course, also people who drive that culture, the values that really make a culture out to what it's supposed to be, and first-hand experiences from people who actually create that culture in every workplace. I'm delighted to be joined by Radhika Nair, Head of People and Culture at Volvo Group India. Warm welcome to you to Culture Cafe, Radhika, and wonderful to have you with us.
Thank you, Dr. Soundarya. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. Kicking off this conversation, my first question to you is, after having seen the amazing work you've done, the fantastic body of work that, has been there throughout your career with a very specific focus on values-led leadership, on what you could do for women in STEM, on what you could do for actually creating a very diverse, equitable, and inclusive culture within the organization. I'm going to ask you, did this work in the workplace culture space kind of happen organically, or was that a conscious choice by you?
To start with, yes, it did happen organically because I was placed in certain roles, and therefore, you kind of pick up certain points from each of the roles, and then you move on forward from there. Having said that, over a period of time, I realized that's more like a responsibility. So, I don't know when it moved, honestly, from, being part of a role and therefore doing that for the role that you're in, to a commitment where, I almost felt compelled that that's something that I really need to work towards. So, and it's not just from an organization standpoint. How do we make sure that even from an academia standpoint, how from a school standpoint, the STEM education standpoint, how do we kind of move it in the ecosystem in such a way that we have an organic growth in that area? So that's something that I think evolved over a period of time. I don't think I designed it. It just happened.
No, but I just loved the way you said that, it's a kind of responsibility of sorts.
Yes.
So I think, from the moment you kind of pursue it because you like it, to actually becoming the custodian of culture, of values, and to really drive progress in a very subtle and understated way through the medium of culture is beautiful. And thank you for expressing that. Leadership, culture, values, these are all things that kind of go hand in hand. And in your rich experience spanning many different organizations, I'm sure you would have seen these three things intersect at various points of time. Has there been any move of yours where you felt that you were actually taking a risk, when it comes to joining a particular organization or, taking up a specific role, which seemed to you to be somewhat of a risk at that point of time? Any such experience, Radhika?
So I would say, when people talk about taking risks, they usually talk about, say, launching a product or chasing a target or making a bold bet in the market. But for me, some of the biggest risks that I have were cultural, which is moving across. I mean, if I look at my own journey, I've been moving across industries where the unspoken rules and values and the pace of work were completely different. So I've gone from banking to retail to telecom, and then to a technology consulting organization with Accenture before, and now in Volvo in the automotive segment. So if there is one constant in my journey, it's been um, that I've culturally disoriented more than a few times, and by choice.
Wow.
Say, for example, take my move from Accenture to Volvo, for example. At Accenture, the culture was like Formula One, pit stop, fast, focused, client facing. It was all about progress over perfection, data driven decisions, and in a way, delivering at speed, if I could say it. Because you were client facing, so you always had to chase certain deadlines. Then I moved to Volvo, and suddenly it felt like uh, I had stepped into a Swedish sauna, warm, intentional, built to last. And everything was consensus driven, deeply purposeful, rooted in a long term view. So at first, I'll admit that I was tempted to hit the gas, but then I realized here it's not about the speed so much. It is about staying with the right pace. And the cultural risk, well, it's not just adapting to these shifts myself, but it's also about bringing the people along in this journey, right? It's tempting as a leader to transplant what worked in our last job. It's about let's move faster, let's be more agile. But cultures don't respond well to cut and paste leadership. You have to respect the roots while still, in a way, gently nudging the system forward, right? So over the years, what I've learned is no matter what the industry, whether it's a banking in with the HSBC, Future Group, Volvo, a strong culture is actually built when you connect people to the purpose, trust them, and give them the tools and the freedom to make decisions. So yes, I've taken few of these cultural leaps of faith. Sometimes I've landed smoothly, sometimes I had to really stretch and grow on the way. But I would say each time I came out of that with a deeper appreciation of how culture isn't something you adapt to, it's also something you can shape, something you do it with, I would say, humility and intent. That's how I place it.
That answer was just so full of quotable quotes. I think our audience is going to rewind and just listen to that one answer quite a few times. I mean, there are so many truths that sink in so beautifully. And, um, I was just thinking the interview panel that selected you for this role at Volvo. I mean, you would have given them such a plethora of reasons to hire you, uh, in spite of coming from such a different culture and a
Yes,
different
that's true.
industry. I mean, this is so beautiful. And my next question just flows very organically and smoothly from your last one.
Mm-hmm.
So, whenever you look at, a large body of work,
Yeah.
experience. And in your case, as you beautifully explained, very different industries, very different cultures, very different ethos, very different values at work. What is
Mm.
appreciated, what is, held high in esteem, all of those things. But I'm certain that, um, there would have been pivotal moments where
Mm.
actually you felt that, oh my god, my career, this is the moment where my career has actually kind of given me meaning. And those kinds of pivotal events, I mean, not just in your career, but in anybody's career, is what finally connects you to that purpose, the
Mm.
cultural purpose that you were talking about. So any such pivotal events, either of yours or of anyone else that you have observed or mentored, which you'd like to share with our audience?
Sure. So, for me, after spending a decade at my previous organization, shifting from a fast paced, world of IT consulting into automotive industry, specifically into a Swedish company like Volvo. Um, like I said, it was more than just a sector change, right? It was a shift in culture at a very fundamental level. But one of the pivotal moments for me weren't very large or huge. It was simple, smaller moments. For example, after a week of my joining, I remember my supervisor, my leader calling me in to say, I'm really sorry that, there is a call later in the day. Would you be okay to join in? And given from, the culture that I was coming in, I immediately, my mind raced to say, oh, of course I can join in, but I'm not very sure if I'll be able to get all the data by then because it was just about 4 or 5 days. So I said, I'm not very sure if I'll be able to count the data and, give it a story before that because it's just another 1.5 hours. And she almost fell off the chair. She said, I would never ask for you to get cull the data in about an hour and a half for a meeting like that. We'll give you enough and more time, like a week or 2 weeks. And honestly, in my previous organization, in 2 weeks, the whole, I would be working in a different project altogether. So, so for me, that was like an aha moment in itself. And then there was another time when um, when it really drove it home for me was when there was a strategic meeting again very early on. I was still, I would say, in lining up data, all of that. I remember presenting a case and saying, "Now here's the data. Let's move on." But instead of a quick alignment, which I typically get in my previous organization, there was a deliberate pause. People just wanted to digest what I said. They wanted to discuss, they wanted to reflect and build that consensus within that team. And that's when I realized this wasn't about inefficiency. It is about the depth over speed. Because in consulting, especially in a US driven culture, the mindset is what's the fastest way to deliver value to the client? So you work backwards from the deadline, right? It's fast, it's sharp, and it's very output driven. But at
Yeah.
Volvo, it's a Scandinavian culture, and therefore the values lie in long term impact, in collaboration, making sure every voice is heard before moving forward. And that's because we are no longer delivering to an external client. We are building sustainable value for our own organization for the long haul, if I could say. Um, and the other difference I would say a moment was the way the data is used. In a consulting organization, you swear by the data. Here, we do look at the data for our products, but when it comes to the people and culture side, there is a lot more. It's an opportunity. Let me put it that way. I saw an opportunity where we could streamline data more, build systems where people decisions just as data driven and agile as they are in any other IT organization. So, yes, the cultures are very different. One's about speed and the other is about sustainability. One thrives on delivery, the other on collaboration. But if you can take the best of both, the pace and the purpose, I think that's the journey that I'm in, where I could take the best of both, the pace and the purpose, because I believe that's where the real transformation will happen or is beginning to happen.
Again, gorgeous answer. And as you were speaking, I was just visualizing how pace is such a determinant of culture. The speed at
Absolutely.
which things happen, that really tells you what the culture is all about. No, are you building
No,
something to last? Are you building something just to deliver? I mean, it's
absolutely.
really a point to ponder. It's something that anybody who's a serious disciple of culture
Mm,
should really sit and reflect on what does pace really tell you about a company's culture. Speaking of pace,
absolutely.
today, I think, AI has created so many perceptions of careers changing, of, questioning as to what am I really doing in this job? If I'm going to be
Mm,
replaced by a robot, then What is the purpose of my education, my experience, my learning thus far? All of these things are questions that are there in people's minds. Now, when you look at technology, needless to mention, technology drives growth, it drives change, it drives progress. But I'm sure there have been instances where people's lives have been upturned by, the advent of technology. So, have you seen in your experience any situation where people really felt threatened by technology? And if so, then what happened to make them change their mind about it? And finally, did you have a happy ending to the story? Did you have them, feel that no, technology is indeed my ally? Did something like that happen? I mean, any such thoughts to share,
Mm.
Radhika? Yeah.
Oh, yes, absolutely. That's, I would say, a daily story for me, because why I say that is because this is actually a question I'm working through every day. How do we help people not just accept technology, but truly grow with it? It's because for me, it's not about eliminating fear. Fear is natural. It's about creating conditions where um, people feel safe enough to evolve, and that means the leadership also has to evolve, the roles has to adapt, and most importantly, we have to invest in building skills and not just systems, right? So, and I'll tell you one story. I remember one story that's really stayed with me. uh, a mid-career colleague, someone who's a real expert in HR processes. She had built her entire identity around knowing those systems inside out. Then introduced an HRMS tool around that time that would automate large parts of her role. Naturally, she was anxious, right? And her first reaction wasn't about excitement, it was fear. Where do I fit into all of this? But instead of pushing those fears aside or giving her a pep talk, what we did was we involved her. She started learning these new digital tools, not just in a crash course, but in small, manageable steps. She also helped design parts of the solution, given her expertise. She even led some of the pilots for process automation and things like that. Within a year, she had gone from fearing the change to becoming the go to person in the team for tech enabled process. And
Lovely.
what's most powerful was not just her growth, it's how her transformation shifted the mindset of others around her. She was at least vocal about what she felt, but there were people who were quietly skeptical, hesitant, started asking, how can I upskill too? So for me, that's the cultural unlock, if you ask me. When technology really becomes a partner, it's a partner, not really a threat, but it also happens when you lead with empathy. I've seen this play out differently across environments where in IT, the pace of change can be so fast that people burn out if you're not careful. In manufacturing, there's a different kind of resistance, which is more, I would say, rooted in legacy, craftsmanship, and strong traditions. But whether it's in IT or it's the shop floor, the common thread is this: change management isn't about um, pushing people forward, it's about bringing them along. And that's the kind of culture we are trying to build, one where people see change not as a disruption, but as an invitation to grow, really. I mean, that's really what I'm hoping we can build every day.
I'm sure you will. I'm sure you will. That was so wonderfully expressed. Culture is what is culture? Culture is but a set of people with common values, with a shared vision, with a sense of purpose coming together and experiencing work in a particular manner. The highs and lows of it, the beauty of it, the passage of time, which tells us that we are, actually progressing towards something together. All of this is what finally creates culture. And in this cultural mix, generations are a beautiful way, of telling us that yes, while things may remain the same, the change is absolutely evident. And no one like a Gen Z or a millennial or, the soon to come Gen Alpha to actually give us a very good realization of where we are and, what's going on around us and whether we are actually a part of it. So, any interesting experiences in working with people either much older than you or much younger than you? Any learnings from that, Radhika?
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting because nowadays we're seeing more and more generational mix in the current workforce, where
True.
it's interesting because knowledge, which was something which say my generation would, you would really look up to somebody for the knowledge that that person has, and today's generation, that knowledge is commoditized. A click of a button, you have the knowledge which you would have had hours to spend in a library to get it. So that itself brings in a lot of shift in the way people think. But for me, one of the most memorable lessons I've learned about culture really came not from a leadership book, but from a conversation with a much younger colleague, I would say. Um, we were all working on a project with really tight timelines in one of my organizations, and one of those classic crunch periods, I casually mentioned we need to stretch a bit over the next few days, because otherwise there's no way we can complete this project. And there is this Gen Z team member looked me straight in my eye and said, "I have a life, and I'm not going to work stretched hours or stretched days just for a deadline." Uh, Honestly, at first, to be very honest, it caught me off guard because I come from a generation where going that extra mile, even at the cost of personal time, was almost like a badge of honor, right? But that moment made me pause. And then a few weeks later, there was another team member who was moving on to another role, told me something similar, that I don't get time beyond work, travel, and home. And I have a life I'm not being able to get to. And, this role does not allow me to do that. And that's why I'm leaving this role.
Oh,
And honestly, both happened in quick successions, and it hit me really hard. They weren't being difficult. They were, today, when I reflect, I feel they were just setting boundaries. They were showing us that sustainability that we keep talking about in business isn't just about planet or our business models. It applies to our people too, right? Because burnout isn't a productivity metrics anyway. So it's a culture warning. And these voices, these young voices, were reminding us of that. On the other hand, and that's one segment of the generation. And on the other hand, I had the privilege of working with really mature colleagues in the older set of generation in an organization, who bring in something just as vital, uh, which I would say perspective. Because I remember one instance when we were pushing for a major shift in the way we work. We were trying to challenge the long-standing processes and norms, while most of us were charging ahead with newer ideas every day, coming up with how things could be done differently, so on and so forth. There's this one senior colleague who slowed us down every day. And honestly, initially it was a little frustrating to be in that situation, but slowly we started to realize, because he kept saying, "This is what happened the last time we tried something similar, and this is what happened, or this is how we failed, or this is what was the impact of it." Now, that insight, in a way, grounded our innovation in practical reality. So it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was resistance, it was wisdom. And that's when it really crystallized for me, because culture doesn't necessarily thrive when we all think the same, right? It thrives when we are actively learning from our differences. Younger colleagues are redefining what balance looks like. Older colleagues are anchoring us with history and lived experiences. And somewhere in that exchange between boldness and grounding, um, I believe culture evolves, or I hope culture evolves.
Wow, that was poetic. That was actually just simply poetry. And I just loved how you described, any kind of a stressful situation which leads to some form of a burnout or a breakdown to be an early warning signal that your culture
Mm,
is probably not doing its job. And that both the experiences or both the examples you gave of the younger person, having boundaries, and the older, more experienced person actually telling you what worked in the past and what didn't. Absolutely brilliant sharing, Radhika. Thank you so much for that. Um, my next question is actually about rituals.
mm,
Um, many organizations are characterized by rituals. And, give the passage of time, and somebody who joined as a newbie, fresher, and who's put in, say, 5 years, 8 years, they consider themselves veterans and they find a deep sense of belongingness to the culture simply because of these rituals, annual rituals, quarterly rituals, rituals which are done, on certain special occasions. And with the passage of time and you experiencing more and more of those rituals, you kind of, your experience of the culture is so set. It actually makes you feel very secure. Any such rituals that you'd like to share with our audience?
yeah, I mean, one of the rituals that I would like to talk about, which is actually something which is in lines with my personal value, um, that has, I think, become now a ritual through my career, is transparency. And when I say that, it didn't start with a formal name or any grand intention, really. Early on, I remember I noticed how powerful it was when leaders would just show up without an agenda, no slides, no performance reviews, just honest conversations. I remember a moment vividly when one Friday afternoon we pulled a few chairs into circle. There were a few consultants, few managers, even a few interns, I think. We just talked about what was working, what wasn't working, what was making people frustrated, what were they really proud of. Um, just that raw honesty and the willingness to listen without defending. That stuck with me. And that was really early on in my career. But every organization after that I've joined, I've created something similar. Um, some places it's like an open house, in some places it's just to connect sessions. But every month we set aside time for these connect sessions. Nothing fancy. It could be just a Teams call or meeting up with a few people. No filters though. We bring what we have to bring to our people, and they ask questions, challenge us. Uh, and it's not treated like a complaint session. It is about trusting the team to speak with intent, and trusting ourselves as leaders to, I would say, respond with transparency. Because uh, for example, in one such connect that happened in the organization, there's somebody who called out, because typically a job architecture is such that you are an individual contributor and then you move to be a manager, and then into leadership roles, so on and so forth. There was
Yes.
this individual who called out that I would like to be a deep expert, but the career architecture doesn't necessarily allow for that. The career architecture, in a way, forces me to move to be a people manager, which is not what I intend to do or intend to be. I want to be a deep expert. So now this conversation came, in a conversation like this. And how did that end? It ended for us to create a job architecture which allowed people to be deep experts and not necessarily move as people managers. Now, we wouldn't have ever done that had we not heard that from our people. So I think that's the heart of it. When people trust that they can say the hard things without fear, you get the truth faster, and that's when real change happens. I've always believed that transparency isn't about telling people everything, it's about not hiding anything. And rituals like these, of course, it's a very small ritual, really, to think about it, but it creates that consistent space for um, telling the truth, something that we as leaders need to know and the employees need to tell. That builds culture where doing the right thing becomes like a second nature. Yeah.
Wow, that was fantastic. And when you were speaking and you were talking about transparency and the fact that all that you share must be the truth, I was reminded of something that my grandmother, who was the
Mhm.
matriarch of our family in this little seaside town of Pondicherry, where I grew up. I used to be probably franker than was required, when I was growing up. So I would get into all sorts of trouble because I would just say what was happening without any filters. So she once called me aside and she said, I know that you're telling the truth and you want to share all of this. Let me just give you one advice. Everything that you say must be the truth, but not all the truth needs to be shared. So,
And yes, I
which actually has stayed with me. So everything that you say must be true and must follow your value system, but then there is a need to know basis, and not that just because you know a truth you don't need to go around tom-tomming it everywhere. So it was fantastic hearing you say a version of that which brought back memories of my party. um, well, culture cannot be something that's only restricted within the organization and
Mhm.
only used for purposes of profitability. We are at the last question of this podcast, which kind of went all too soon, Radhika, in a way, and it was so enjoyable. But I have to ask you this final question. If you were to look at the value of culture beyond the walls of your organization, something that could transform lives outside, um, do you think that's possible? And do you think you have a story to share in that regard?
Yes, I'd certainly feel it is possible. And when we talk about the company culture, it is easy to tie it back to profitability, efficiency, performance metrics, so on and so forth. But I believe the real test of culture is, or the unexpected magic, if I may call it that way, is when it starts to influence people outside your organization. And at Volvo, we've seen that happen in some truly humbling ways. For example, one example that really stands out for me is when we began our sustainability journey in India. Uh, like many large organizations, we had a clear vision to say we need to reduce the carbon footprint, more responsible sourcing, therefore, the usual. Uh, and I remember my head of purchasing at that time, was telling me that the first thing that we did was we went to our vendor partners, and said, "This is what we intend to do." We made our deliberate choice to kind of make sure that we bring our vendor partners into or along in that journey from day one. I remember him saying, I was not sure, very sure how that will happen. And when they asked this question to say, okay, how will this happen? I'm not very sure if I gave them a very convincing answer. But I told them, I don't know how we'll get there, but we need to. Um, did they see? I mean, there were obviously those kind of inhibitions to say, how would they respond? Because that talks about extra cost. What will be the resistance? But you know what? When you really take people early on into something that you truly believe, for us, sustainability is something that we swear by every day. So, what happened really surprised us, because these partners, of course, we did believe that they will take the journey forward with us, but really the responses that came in, the kind of green castings and others that that they were able to deliver, was something even beyond what we had thought that they could deliver, because they saw we were genuine. They saw this wasn't a PR campaign. It was our culture. The kind of ownership from people who aren't even in your payroll. That's when you know your values are truly resonating. And I'll tell you about another one, which I thought was, of course, it happened some time back, but I heard it from one of the sales, person in our group, where I don't know if you're aware, but in Volvo, safety is something that we are very, very conscious of, and it is part of our culture. It's part of something that we do for I mean, not just for people who are driving a Volvo vehicle, but it's also people who are associated with Volvo. For us, safety is super important. So there was this time when emergency braking system was just coming into play, um, and when we introduced it in the India market, from one of the dealers, there was a pushback. The dealer called out that I'll not be able to buy these trucks because of the added cost. And that's if you really think about it, that's a classic business tension, right? But here's what's incredible. Our sales team, instead of trying to negotiate or make a quick sale, they said we are not going to. They refused to sell the trucks without the emergency braking system. Imagine a salesperson saying, "I will not sell you trucks without the emergency braking system." So, and mind you, this was not a directive from the top. No rule book told them that they cannot do it or they have to do it. It was just our culture in action. But to solve it creatively, of course, what they did was they initially absorbed the cost for a small batch, got these trucks on the road, and then came back with the data, real stories of how real lives were saved, how many times was emergency brake really applied. And that same dealer, he became one of our strongest advocates for safety features going forward. And what that tells me is when your culture is authentic and lived, it doesn't just stay within the company walls. It starts influencing decisions, mindsets, and behaviors across your ecosystem. And honestly, that's more valuable than any bottom line again, right? So I truly believe that if the intent is right, it just flows into the ecosystem.
Okay, so that was so wonderfully expressed, and culture as the savior, culture, really getting into your DNA, culture that even trumps just a temporary sales high, and kind of goes for what is sustainable. All of this was
Absolutely.
so wonderfully brought out by you in this final, answer of yours, Radhika. Let me end this conversation by saying how truly delightful it was having you here with us, and the extraordinarily thought provoking answers, the very deep messages that you so very lightly and very in a very grounded way just wove into every response. I'm sure this is a podcast that's going to stay with our viewers, with our listeners for a very, very long time to come. And they say that great storytelling is the absolutely wonderful hallmark of every true leader. And needless to mention, you kind of definitely proved that rule. So here's
Oh,
wishing you
thank you
a
so
fabulous leadership journey ahead. And thank you once again, Radhika, for joining us here at Culture Cafe.
Thank you, Dr. Soundarya. It was a pleasure to be here, and I'm really hoping that the audience will have something to take away from the session.
I'm sure they're going to have a lot to take away. And so, folks, this is me signing off today after a brilliant podcast and conversation with Radhika Nair, Head of People and Culture at Volvo Group, India. Till next time, bye bye.